trusted her. Not because I had proof she was trustworthy, but because for 34 years, I never had a reason not to. That's the part that still gets me. Not the betrayal itself, but how completely blind I was walking into it. My name is Charles. I'm 63 years old. I spent 31 years as a structural engineer for a mid-sized firm in Columbus, Ohio. I retired early, 59, because my knees weren't cooperating anymore, and because, frankly, I'd saved enough. My wife, Beverly, had always said that when I retired, we'd finally do all the things we kept pushing off. Road trips, grandkids, maybe a cruise down to the Gulf. She said a lot of things. We'd been married since 1991, met at a church potluck in Worthington. She brought a green bean casserole, I brought store-bought rolls and tried to pretend I'd made them. She saw right through me and laughed anyway. That laugh. I fell in love with that laugh before I even knew her name. Our son, Derek, he goes by his middle name now, calls himself Pace, which I still can't get used to. He's 31. Lives about 40 minutes north of us in Delaware, Ohio, with his wife and their 2 kids, my grandkids, 5 and 7. Those 2 are the best thing I've done with my life, and I didn't even do anything. They just showed up. Last October, Beverly told me her sister in Dayton had been diagnosed with something serious. She said the word some kind of autoimmune condition, the name of which I can't spell. And I didn't push for more details because Beverly looked genuinely shaken. Her sister, Ruth Ann, had always been the healthy one in the family. Former marathon runner, grew her own vegetables, the kind of woman who made the rest of us feel guilty for owning a microwave. Beverly said she needed to go stay with Ruth Ann for a few days, help her get settled after some procedure. I said, of course. I meant it. I helped her pack, carried her bag to the car, kissed her on the cheek in the driveway on a Tuesday morning in October when the leaves were coming down hard off the oaks out front. I went back inside and made coffee and thought about what a good woman my wife was. I want you to hold on to that moment because I'm about to tell you what happened 3 days later. And I need you to understand how far that Tuesday morning was from what I found. The thing about retiring is that the days blur together in a way nobody warns you about. When you're working, Tuesday feels like Tuesday. When you're not, it's just another rotation of the same quiet hours. I was spending most of my time in the garage that week. I'd been restoring an old workbench I picked up at an estate sale. Nothing special, just something to keep my hands busy. I had the radio on. Classic country, the old stuff. I was sanding a corner joint when my phone rang. It was my neighbor from across the street, a 70-year-old retired postal worker named Arnie, who has lived on our block for 22 years and who has never once called me without a reason. He said, "Hey Chuck, sorry to bother you. Just wanted to make sure everything's okay over there." I put the sander down. "Yeah, why?" "Had a car I didn't recognize parked in front of your house most of yesterday. Silver sedan. Nobody got out as far as I could tell, but it sat there a long time. I figured Beverly was back, but I didn't see her car. Just seemed off." I told him I appreciated it, that Beverly was in Dayton, and that I'd keep an eye out. He said okay and hung up, and I stood in my garage for a minute with the radio still on and some feeling I couldn't name sitting at the bottom of my stomach. I told myself it was nothing. Probably someone visiting the Kellermans 3 doors down. Probably a delivery driver taking a break. I told myself that and went back to the workbench, but that night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed listening to the house. That particular kind of quiet a house has when you've lived in it long enough to know every sound it makes, and I kept coming back to what Arnie said. Silver sedan. Parked, but nobody getting out. And I started thinking about something else too. Beverly had called me each of the first 2 days. Short calls. Just checking in, Ruth Ann was doing okay. She'd eaten a little, the procedure had gone fine. Normal calls. But she hadn't called that 3rd day. Not once. And I hadn't thought much of it in the moment, but now, lying there in the dark, it felt like a gap where something should have been. I picked up my phone and called her. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. I texted her. Nothing. I told myself she was probably asleep. It was past 10, old habits and all that. She texted back 20 minutes later. "Sorry. Fell asleep early. Ruth Ann had a rough day. Talk tomorrow." Love you. I read it 3 times. I don't know what I was looking for. Something in the rhythm of it, maybe. It felt like a sentence somebody wrote while thinking about something else. I drove to Dayton the next morning. I didn't tell her I was coming. I want to be clear about why I did that. It wasn't suspicion. Not exactly. I think I just missed her. 34 years and I still missed her after 4 days. I stopped at a Kroger off I-70 and bought flowers, a mixed bunch with some yellow sunflowers in it because those were always her favorites, and a bag of those chocolate-covered pretzels she liked, and I drove the rest of the way feeling almost good about it. I was going to knock on Ruth Ann's door and see my wife's face and feel like an idiot for lying awake the night before. I pulled onto Ruth Ann Street just before 11 in the morning. Beverly's car was in the driveway, and parked right behind it, a silver sedan. I sat at the curb for a moment. I remember the radio was on, and I reached over and turned it off. Just like that. The silence in the car felt different after I did it. I got out with the flowers. I walked up the front path. The door to Ruth Ann's house was not quite latched. I could see a sliver of the frame not meeting the strike plate, the way it looks when someone closed it in a hurry. I knocked, waited, knocked again. Ruth Ann opened the door. She looked at me and her face did something complicated, surprise, then something that wasn't quite guilt but was related to it, like a cousin of guilt. "Chuck," she said, "I didn't know you were coming." "Neither did Beverly," I said. "Is she here?" There was a pause. Just a half second, but I've been reading pauses in structural materials for 31 years. A half second is a long time when something's about to give. "Yeah, come in." I came in. Beverly was in the living room. She was sitting on the couch. She was not alone. There was a man sitting in the armchair across from her, mid-40s maybe, dressed casually, a laptop open on the coffee table between them, papers spread out on either side of it. He stood up when I walked in. Beverly stood up too. Her face went the color of chalk. "Charles," she said. I looked at the papers on the table. "I'm an engineer. I read documents for a living. You learn to take in a page in about 2 seconds and know what you're looking at." What I was looking at was financial documentation. Our financial documentation. Account statements. A property valuation for our house. Something that looked like a summary sheet from a financial advisor, not our financial advisor, someone else's. I set the flowers down on the end table. Carefully. I'm not sure why I was careful about it, but I was. "What is this?" I said. Nobody said anything for a moment. Then the man closed his laptop and said he'd give us some privacy and walked past me to the kitchen. I heard him go out the back door. Beverly said, "Sit down, Charles. I'm fine standing." "What is this?" She told me, not all at once. It came out in pieces, the way things come out when someone's been holding them a long time, and the container finally cracks. She'd been talking to a financial planner. She'd been thinking about. She used the word restructuring. She said she'd been unhappy for a while. She said she didn't know how to bring it up. She said she was sorry. I said, "How long?" "How long what?" "How long what?" "How long have you been meeting with someone about restructuring our finances?" She looked at the carpet. 8 months. 8 months. 8 months. While I carried her bag to the car, while I kissed her cheek in the driveway, while I made coffee and thought about what a good woman she was. I picked up the flowers. I don't know why. I just picked them up off the end table and stood there holding them. I looked at Ruth Ann, who was standing in the doorway to the hall. "Were you sick?" I asked her. She couldn't look at me either. "I'm sorry, Chuck." So that was that. Here's what I found out over the next several weeks, through our respective attorneys and through some digging I did on my own once I had my feet back under me. Beverly had been meeting with a financial planner, not the man in the living room, who turned out to be her attorney, for the better part of a year. She had consulted with a divorce attorney in August. She had been gathering documentation on our joint assets, our retirement accounts, our property, and the small rental duplex we owned in Clintonville since 2008. Under Ohio law, marital assets are divided equitably in a divorce, which doesn't mean equally, but which is supposed to take into account things like length of marriage, contributions of each spouse, and future earning capacity. My attorney, a methodical man named Bert, who looked like he'd seen everything and maybe had, explained to me that Beverly's approach, getting documentation quietly, consulting professionals in advance, was not illegal. It was, he said, smart. He said it the way you'd say something was smart without meaning it as a compliment. What I want to tell you is that I fell apart. But I didn't, exactly. I went home that day and I walked through our house and I looked at 34 years of accumulated living. The photos on the hall wall, the furniture we'd argued about buying and then loved, the garden she planted off the back patio that I'd watered every summer. And I felt something I didn't have a word for at the time. Not grief, exactly. More like the structural equivalent of discovering a crack in a load-bearing wall. The house looks the same from the outside, but you know now that something fundamental has been compromised, and you have to decide what to do about it. I called my son that evening, told him what I'd found. There was a silence on his end that lasted long enough that I said, "Pace, you there?" "Yeah," he said. "Dad, I'm sorry." Another pause, and then something in his voice, something careful, calibrated, made me ask the question I hadn't thought to ask yet. "Did you know anything about this?" He didn't answer right away, which was itself an answer. He said, "She talked to me. Back in the summer. I told her she needed to talk to you directly. I told her that." I sat with that for a while. My son had known since summer. He'd sat across from me at his kitchen table in August when I was there for my grandson's birthday. I grilled hot dogs, my granddaughter put stickers on my forearms. I drove home full and happy, and he'd known. I said, "Okay," and I meant it as an ending to the conversation, and he understood it that way, and we hung up. I want to be fair about my son. He was in an impossible position. His mother, his father. I understand that, but understanding something and not feeling it are different things, and for a while I felt both the understanding and the hurt sitting side by side in my chest like two people who didn't like each other, but had to share a waiting room. What I did next was the most practical thing I know how to do. I built a structure. I met with Bert 3 times in the first 2 weeks. I got my own accounting of our assets. Every account, every property, every retirement contribution I'd made over 3 decades. I knew our finances well. I'd been the one managing them for most of our marriage. Not because Beverly was incapable, but because she preferred it that way. That meant I had documentation. That meant I had context. Bert said that was going to matter. The rental duplex in Clintonville was in both our names, but I'd handled every repair, every tenant issue, every property tax filing since we bought it. I had records going back 15 years. Receipts, communications, maintenance logs, the kind of evidence that a court finds useful when determining contribution. Our retirement accounts were more complicated. I had significantly more saved than Beverly. I'd maxed out my 401k contributions most years while she'd worked part-time for long stretches when Derek was young. Under Ohio's equitable distribution, a portion of my retirement savings could be considered marital property. Bert walked me through the math. It was painful math, but it was math I could work with. The house we agreed to sell. That was the clearest thing. 34 years of mortgage payments and 2 refinances. We had substantial equity. We split it down the middle. I didn't fight that. It was fair. What I did fight, quietly, through documentation and patience, was the characterization of my retirement savings. My attorney filed what's called a QDRO, a Qualified Domestic Relations Order, and we negotiated a division that accounted for the disparity in contributions. It wasn't everything I wanted. Nothing in a divorce is everything you wanted, but it was equitable in the actual sense of the word, proportional to what each of us had put in. The divorce was finalized the following March. 5 months from that Tuesday morning in the driveway to a signed decree, I moved into a rental in Bexley, A two-bedroom apartment on the second floor of a converted Victorian, which felt extremely unlike me, and which I have come to love with an intensity that surprised me. I have a bay window that looks out onto a maple tree. In November, the leaves came down, and in February, there was ice on the branches, and in April, it started coming back. I watched all of it. I had time to watch all of it. I'm not going to tell you I wasn't angry. I was angry. There were nights when the anger woke me up the same way the uncertainty had, that same abrupt 3 a.m. clarity, except instead of wondering what was wrong, I knew exactly what was wrong and felt all of it at once. 34 years, 8 months of planning, a silver sedan parked across from my house. But here's what I want to say about the anger. It burned clean. That's the only way I know how to put it. It wasn't poison. It was fuel. I used it to get my documentation together. I used it to pay attention in meetings with Bert when I wanted to check out. I used it to remember that the version of Charles who carried that bag to the car was not stupid. He was trusting. And there's a difference. My son and I found our way back. It took about 6 months, and a conversation we had on his back porch in July that I won't describe in detail except to say it was honest and it hurt. And at the end of it, we were closer than we'd been before any of this started. His wife, my daughter-in-law, a woman of remarkable patience, brought us both a beer partway through and quietly went back inside, and that gesture has stayed with me. My grandkids still put stickers on my forearms. My granddaughter told me recently that my apartment is better than a hotel because I let her jump on the bed. I thought about correcting her on the hotel comparison, but I didn't. Beverly and I don't speak. That's her preference, and I've come to respect it as the cleanest possible outcome. Some things don't need to be processed in ongoing conversation. Some things can just be done. Ruth Ann sent me a card last spring. A regular card, nothing fancy, and inside she wrote that she was sorry and that she'd always considered me a good man. I read it standing at my mailbox, and then I went upstairs and put it on my kitchen counter and looked at it for a few days. Then I threw it away, not out of cruelty, just because I'd read it enough times and I was ready to put it down. I still have the workbench. It's in the storage unit I rent on Livingston Avenue. I couldn't fit it in the apartment, and I'm not ready to part with it. Someday I'll have a garage again. I'll put it in there and sand the last corner joint, and it'll be done. I know what I'm made of. I know what 34 years of good faith looks like, and I know what its absence looks like. And now that I know the difference, I can't unknow it. That's not a loss. It cost a lot to find out, but the knowing itself, that's mine. Nobody can take that back. I drive past our old house sometimes, not on purpose, just when I'm in that neighborhood. The new owners painted the front door red. I don't know how I feel about that, but the oaks out front are still there, still dropping leaves every October right on schedule, not caring at all who's watching. That's something, I think, that's actually something. There's a moment I keep coming back to, not the living room, not the papers on the table. It's earlier. It's me standing in the driveway on a Tuesday morning in October, holding Beverly's bag, feeling nothing but good about the day. That version of me didn't know anything yet, and I've had to make my peace with him because he wasn't wrong to trust. He was just trusting someone who had already decided to stop deserving it. I think about cause and effect a lot now, not in a mystical way. I'm an engineer. I deal in load-bearing realities. But what I've come to believe, slowly and without any drama about it, is that the choices people make compound over time. Beverly didn't wake up one morning and become someone who hides financial documents in her sister's living room. That happened in degrees. A small dishonesty here, a quiet justification there. 8 months of planning while I kissed her cheek in the driveway. The end result was just the final calculation of everything she'd been adding up in private. And I think about my own accounting too. I'd spent 34 years trusting without verifying, not because I was naive. I don't think that's quite it. I think I confused loyalty with attentiveness. I was loyal. I showed up. I worked. I contributed. But I stopped paying close attention to the person I was being loyal to. I stopped asking whether what I was seeing was real. An engineer who stops inspecting the structure isn't noble. He's negligent. I was negligent about my own life, and that's on me. What I'm proudest of, and I don't say that word lightly, I'm not a man who uses it easily, is how I handled the months after. Not perfectly. There were nights I wasn't proud of. But when it mattered, when I sat across from Bert with all those documents and had to make clear-headed decisions about my future, I was present. I used what I knew, 31 years of reading structures, finding where the stress was concentrated, understanding what could hold and what couldn't. I applied that same precision to the worst thing that had ever happened to me, and it worked. Knowing your own competence is not arrogance. It's the only real tool you have when everything else is gone. And then there's my son, Pace. That conversation on his back porch in July was harder than anything with the attorneys, because he's my kid, and I love him. And he made a choice I wouldn't have made, and I had to find a way to hold both of those things at once. Integrity, I've decided, doesn't mean demanding that everyone around you meets a perfect standard. It means being honest about what happened, saying the hard thing out loud, and then deciding deliberately what you want the relationship to be going forward. We did that. It took time. It held. I drove past the house on Elmwood last week. The red front door. The Oaks, 63 years old, living in a two-bedroom apartment with a bay window and a maple tree. And I am, without exaggeration, more clear-eyed about who I am than I have ever been. It cost a lot to get here, but I didn't collapse under it. I didn't let it make me smaller. I let it make me more accurate about people, about myself, about what I'm actually willing to carry. That's the only revenge I needed.